Only recently, I discovered the term qualia because of a new free-to-play indie game now available on Steam. Qualia are your individual experiences of perception and sensation. For example, how you feel when you look at the color red, or how you feel when you bite into a cookie. Developed by Solodev Sydney, the game Qualia simulates an AI research study in which you must determine who is human and who is AI. So today we're setting out on a psychological journey with Sydney and with my dear husband Eve. And we'll also discover more about Sydney, like how and why she switched from making films to making games, and how her decade-long background in film helped shape her first interactive story. So grab your lab coat and prepare to question reality.
Sydney, it's so nice to have you on our show today. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Sydney. I'm the solo dev behind Qualia and the currently only creator person for CMY2K, the little game studio that I created.
Great to have you on our show today. And the game that you created, Qualia, is a really cool game that tackles a lot of philosophical questions and a lot of topics that are really relevant. But before we dive into your game, how do you feel about your game, Qualia?
Yeah, I feel really good. It's funny because I was actually just having a conversation with someone. I had like a little party for the game coming out to kind of celebrate that it exists and it happened. And
Cool.
I started having a conversation with someone that, because they asked me a very similar question. And I think something that I've kind of discovered as a creative, at least for myself, and I can't speak for all creatives, that at a certain point, I will never be completely satisfied with something that I make, and I will always think that it can be better, and it will never be the level of perfect that I want it to be. But there is a certain point where you can be happy enough with what it is, and that is when it's okay to show other people and put it out into the world. Because I could keep working on Qualia forever, right? I could keep working on it for 5-10 more years and have it be the perfect game in my head, but that may never actually happen, and I'll always be chasing that goalpost. And so being happy enough, I think, is okay, which is funny because I don't know if that's an answer that you expected.
Absolutely.
But it's always something where, like, there's always so many things where I'm like, oh, but I could just keep doing this and I could keep doing that. And maybe I could do it this way. And maybe by then, why did I make it in Twine? Maybe I could report the entire thing into Unity and then you could walk around. Right? It's going forever. So, but I'm happy enough with it, and good.
I'm satisfied with that you are happy with it or happy enough with it, which is a beautiful answer. And also it really shows that your game, even though it's a small text-based game, is packed with a lot of huge ideas. But for our listeners who may have not tried the game yet, can you describe your game to us? So what do players see, what do they hear, and what do they actually do when they play the game? And I guess what I'm asking is, what kind of mood are you trying to create with the game as well?
So with Qualia, it is made in Twine. It's a text-based game, but I tried my hardest to make it not feel like one of those old-fashioned interactive fiction games where you just see, a black screen and white text, that's what it looks like when you make a game in Twine without adding any decor. And so I want it to feel like a sort of retro computer interface, but an abstract retro where I never specifically tell the players what time period they're in. I put a bunch of different years throughout the game. There's so much lore that people can discover if they click around. And there's a bunch of years hidden everywhere, but they're all sort of strange. And if people would think about it, they're like, okay, well, that year happened, but that thing that they're talking about in that year never could have happened in that year in real life because it didn't happen then. So it's sort of like this interesting alternate future past, but a very retro nostalgic vibe for those who were around then. And it has a lot of like sort of bold colors that are also supposed to kind of help people get into the mood of like, okay, I'm thinking maybe this is an older like 80s, 90s Mac interface. And we have like again, like the retro computer border. So everyone's kind of in that vibe of like, okay, there's kind of like a, creepy analog horror retro computer vibe going on. And that really sets up the mood for the fact that this is, I consider it a horror game, although ironically, Steam does not, because they rejected my application submission, I guess, for the horror festival in October, which I will send them a very strongly worded email about. But it's sort of supposed to feel a little bit unsettling, but also very clinical and not off-putting in a way that you are uneasy or like you're afraid to click the next button, but more of just like, okay, I'm in a very immersive zone where I am on a computer and I am clicking these buttons. And when I say on a computer, sure, the player's computer, but also the fake computer that I've kind of created, where like the player is a character in the story because they're actually the one looking at this imaginary computer that I've set up.
And what do the players do? So when I assume the role as the character in your game, I click through the game and answer a couple of questions. So what was the motivation behind those questions?
The premise is that you're in a voluntary participation study where you're a judge for 2 participants who may be artificial or human. There's going to be a question, and then each one of those participants will give an answer to that question. And based on your level of judgment on creativity and language use and a bunch of other different characteristics, you kind of look at their answers and think, okay, well, that one seems a bit more artificial than the other one. You mark it, and then you move on to the next question. You do that for a couple questions, and then based off of your performance in the test, different things may happen. And we can boil those later if we want, but I'll leave it there for now. It's interesting because that is very similar to what an actual Turing test is. There's been a lot of different adaptations and different versions of Turing tests since the very first one. And then the Chinese room is interesting because I wouldn't say that there's been a lot of adaptations of it specifically, but it is something that I think happens quite often, that a lot of people maybe like aren't realizing that it is a similar version to the Chinese room. But sort of the whole goal is that, or at least what I've seen a lot of players do, is that they'll see a question and then they'll see the 2 participant answers, and then they will personally answer the question because they say to themselves, okay, I am a human. I know I'm a human. How would I answer this question? And then out of the 2 participants, whoever answers closer to my answer must be a human, because I'm the human, so my answer has to be the right one.
What I really liked about it is that you put in this meta aspect as well. So it's not purely answer these questions and hooray, you answered the questions, thanks for participating. But the longer you play and the more you discover in the game, you get this a small bit of information about what you're actually doing. So you're going back from this just answer a questionnaire to, okay, what does it really mean to be human? The way you did this by storytelling was really fascinating. I never heard about the Chinese room thought experiment before. I've heard about the imitation game and the Turing test, because every time you hear something about artificial intelligence, that's the one that keeps popping up. But the Chinese room thought experiment was really something that I discovered while playing your game, which is really cool.
See, that's amazing. Yeah, it's funny because there is so much in the game that is based on things in real life. There is, in the Steam store description, I forget what I call it, but I think I say educational lore as like a feature of the game. Because it's like a computer interface, I have like this description of like, okay, this is what you're going to do in the game. And then I mention like, you may be aware of the Chinese room and the Turing test, and I actually have them as links, and you can go and click on it and then read about what those 2 things are, which is really funny because I've seen people be like, I actually like, I've watched streamers play it and they'll be reading the sentence and they're like, oh, the Chinese room, what's that? And then they click on it and then it's like the first thing at the top of the page is a video that says, what is the Chinese room? And they're like, oh, great. And then they watch it and they learn and they're like, fantastic. So it's a very like interestingly educational game, which I did not set out to make an educational game, but it was just something where I realized, okay, I'm kind of dealing with a lot of philosophical themes and questions about life that people probably have had, but they don't necessarily have like context for maybe where some of those questions have been explored in the past. And so I figured, okay, let me give people just like a little bit of information that if they want to read and learn, they totally can, but it's not required. And I've been pleasantly surprised to know that a lot of people are like, oh, great, I'm going to like go and learn about what this thing is, which is wonderful. Because one of my big fears, I guess, when I was making this game was, okay, it's a text game. Everybody hates reading, so nobody's going to play it. But I was wrong. I was so wrong.
You managed to blend it with so much different media. So it's not only text, it's the combination of how you present the text. So there are also these subtle little things like how fast or how slow the participants respond. It's not like the text just plops up, but sometimes you see some kind of hesitation, which is a subtle hint. As you mentioned, the videos that are really cool and really put you into the world, which are really immersive. The soundtrack, which is amazing, by the way. And so we have to talk about that as well. The combination of all those things is really a great package.
Thank you. Yeah, I when I was kind of setting out to make a game, I knew, because I am primarily a writer. I come from the film industry, and so I knew I wanted to make a game, or at least start making some type of game. And my only like knowable to me transferable skill would be writing. And so I was like, okay, if I'm going to make a game 100% by myself, it's going to be like a text game or some sort of like visual novel or something like that. And I am not an illustrator. So I thought, okay, there's no way that I can do art for my game in the way that like a classic visual novel would have. So I thought, okay, I will do like stock photos. And so every asset in the game, minus the little animations for explaining what the like Turing test and Chinese room are, everything in the game is stock, like footage and sound and everything. And so I thought, okay, we'll do stock stuff because I know how to use Photoshop very well, so I can kind of cobble together things. And then I thought, okay, well, in order for it to look the best, it has to be like first person immersive. So that's when I decided, all right, the computer screen and everything. And once I had all of that together, I was like, all right, what's the only thing that I can think about? It has to be some sort of like survey or like some sort of quiz element where people are going to be sort of answering something or they're the ones participating. And so it kind of all came together where like I had all of these limitations and all of these different variables, almost not exactly, but almost like a game jam where like I had certain restrictions and rules where like, okay, the game has to be this and it has to do that. And I can only use like this asset and everything. And so from there, I just kind of developed a story based on knowing all of those variables were going to be the case for this game, which was really fun because if I had just started like, all right, I'm going to make a random game and I have no limitations, I think it would have been very overwhelming for sure. But being able to kind of narrow in on other details before getting into the themes of the story, it helped me be able to really focus on the story itself because I knew all the other things were already covered.
Yeah, love that approach. These are the things that I want to do and then build from there and then start introducing all of these elements to the story as well. I can imagine you have a huge text file with all of the references or something that you put through the game.
I do, because I have so many different Easter eggs and references. Basically, every date or proper noun is a reference to something. There's a lot of like pop fiction names, so any name is a reference to something related to robotics or science fiction. Like there's one, which is funny, it's the one name that people are always like, this is a weird name. You see the name Tima at one point in the game, and that's a reference to the animated Japanese version of Metropolis, which was something that was incredible when I was a kid. Absolutely blew my mind and was a formative story for me. But I was like, okay, like for example, that's a perfect reference name. There's also like Dr. Kara Locke, which Kara would be, there was the original Detroit Become Human like trailer that came out really early, way before the actual game came out, where it was like that robot kind of discussing, she's like being built up in a factory and she's kind of discussing like, oh, I want to be alive, don't like destroy me. And that robot's name was Kara. And so I was like, okay, perfect. Anytime I needed a name, I would just kind of go through my like backlog of like, all right, what do I know and what do I love and what names are other characters in the past, or other, real non-fiction people in the world that I can kind of reference. And if people are, aware of whatever that is, they'll be really excited to see a name cameo.
That's beautiful. I caught a couple of references and was thinking, okay, that's cool. So it really shows that you poured a lot of yourself and a lot of your heart into this game.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. What feature in your game are you most proud of?
That's a good question. I like to think, because this was my first game and I'm not a programmer, any feature is one that I forgot. Anything that works, anything that is clickable and has feedback for the player, I think is incredible. Interestingly enough, so in one of the endings, there's like a CSS coin flip at one point, and I added that in very, very, very late. I knew I wanted the game to come out on March 13th. That was like a personal deadline. And I really was working up until the very last day, adding little things here and there. And I kind of reworked one of the endings, I think on like the 11th. And so I went through and I like redid that whole ending, and I wanted to do this coin flip, and I could not figure out how to do it because, again, I'm not really a programmer. I'm like learning from Google and other people's like forum documentation from 20 years ago. And so I wanted to do a coin flip. I saw it was possible and I found code for it. And the thing about Twine is that even though it's HTML and CSS, it's kind of like, it's like its own HTML and CSS in a way, where you can use existing just like web dev code, but then you can't exactly just drop that in all the time. Sometimes things need to be tweaked and edited. And so I found a coin flip, and then it was, hours trying to make it work with Twine. And eventually I did, and it is just like such a little detail, but on that page you actually like, I have the player, I'm like, okay, flip this coin. And so there's like a picture of a coin, and then they go and they click on it, and it actually like kind of does like this little flip animation thing. And just the fact that it actually worked and it ended up doing that, I was so ecstatic about. And I'm like, again, like the day before it, comes out, and I'm like, yeah, we got this coin flip in there. And it's just it was something where I was just really excited that it worked. And it was just a little detail that I was like, oh, hell yeah, this feels so immersive and it feels very tactile, that like you click the thing and then the thing spins. Something about that I was just so proud of.
And thematically, it was absolutely worth it because from the story point of view, it fits perfectly into the situation that you as a player are in this moment, and also helps to really visualize this conundrum that you're in.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, it's supposed to be sort of like a metaphor, and I'm like using it as like a visual explanation instead of kind of just going back and forth and talking about all these like formulas and everything over and over again. And so I actually think, interestingly, when I see people play the game and they get to the coin flip, they do really they understand it really well, which I'm very happy about.
I was debating with myself if we should talk a little bit more about the story, but I believe everyone who's listening here should try it out for themselves, because the game is free on Steam. So you can go to Steam right now, type in Qualia, and then just download the game and play it without any additional costs. Which brings me to my question. Why did you decide to release the game for free?
It's funny. People are asking me this. I think, part of me thinks, and it's a small part, like 10%, was like, man, maybe I should have charged something for it. But realistically, I don't regret making it free, and I think it was the right decision because a couple reasons. First, this is my first game, and I guess I just didn't think, or I wasn't confident enough that people would be willing to spend, $5 or however much on something that they didn't have any context for, where, they maybe don't trust me that I could make a good game because they have no evidence otherwise, right? They haven't seen another game by me. I haven't worked on anything else in the games industry before. And so people would be less likely to try out a game because it would cost money. And even if you played a little bit and return it, it just didn't seem like it was worth it for me. And I also, realistically, I did not expect that many people to play it. I thought, okay, I mean, what am I gonna make? Like $10 out of, you know, a couple dozen people playing? It didn't seem like it was worth all of that. And that was one part of it. And then the other part, which is, I mean, it's kind of in the same vein, where I figured, okay, if it's free, so many more people without any context would be willing to just add it to their library and try it out, because there's nothing to lose. It's free. They're not going to risk losing money. And again, even if they return it, they don't even have to go through the hassle of getting a refund for it. So it would have been something where I figured, okay, I'll make it free. If people hear about it or see something about it, it's very easy to go to Steam and just add it to your library. Even if you don't play it yet, you can just sort of acquire it, and then you have it, and then maybe one day you'll play it. And it seemed to really work out. I have an overwhelming number of people who have added the game to their library and played it, and it makes me so happy. And I don't think that ever would have, like, I would not have been able to reach those numbers or had the amount of streamers play it or just the amount of attention it's gotten if it was paid, which I think is, realistically, it's a little bit depressing and maybe a slight commentary on the games industry, but also it's something that I kind of prepared for, and I knew that that would be the case, that just in general, regardless of the numbers themselves, that I would have more people willing to play it if it was free, and I was willing to kind of lean into that, because also now it did exactly what I wanted, where people really liked it. And, you know, now I have people in my Discord, and I have people following me on, you know, Twitter and Blue Sky, and they're really excited about whatever I do next. And I think that I have a little group of fans now that they will be willing to buy my next game. And that's all the context they need, is they really liked Qualia. And so if I have another game that comes out for $5, $10, I don't know, $15, they'll think, okay, perfect, I'm going to buy this. I don't need to be concerned about, oh, am I maybe not going to like it? Which is, I mean, it's very possible. Maybe they'll hate it, but at least they're willing to give it a try. And that was something that I thought would be more valuable in the moment than any possible small amount of money I could make by, I don't know, making Qualia a couple bucks, which is an interesting marketing decision. Probably not the best business move, but I hate business and I'm definitely more like marketing focused. And I figured, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice real economy and lean more into the attention economy.
Which is really cool. You will stay in games then, even after Qualia is finished.
Yeah, I have, well, I'm wrapping up some DLC for Qualia now, and after that, there are kind of 2 games that are in my focus that I'm working on, and then I have like a couple things I'm working on with other people. But yeah, I think, you know, I came from the film industry, and, you know, I've been working in it for like a decade, and I used to make little short films myself. They were usually around like 1 minute. It was something where, you know, kind of similar to Qualia, which is realistically much larger than the films that I made, because it's like, I don't know, depending on how long it takes people to get to all 6 endings, that's like a 90-minute experience versus watching a 1-minute film. I make these like little 1-minute films once a year, and it was just something where it's a very good like creative outlets to be able to just make something that's short, that you kind of just make to make, and then it's wonderful, and then you feel great, and then you move on to the next one quite quickly. I took a little bit of a break from that during the pandemic, and I'm trying to get everything, you know, sorted back after that. And I think once I kind of discovered that I could also do that in games, it feels really good, and it seems to be a really good fit post-pandemic, and being a storyteller and being able to still make something even though it's a bit different and there's different requirements, but also you know, it's a balance. I wouldn't say better or worse, but maybe it's a better fit now. And so I think if I continue to have that drive and urge to make a thing, doing it in games instead of in film for the time being, or however long, we'll see. Maybe I'll do games again for the rest of my life. Yeah, it feels good. I definitely have more stories that I want to do and weird things that I want to do. And so I already have a whole list of games, and I'm like, all right, we're going to immediately start working on these.
Being completely selfish here, running an indie game podcast, I'm really glad that you stick to games.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. I'm like a gamer myself. I love playing games, and I think, you know, there's it's interesting because I'm seeing a lot of are like industry titans who are currently using games as their storytelling medium talk about how it really is one of the most immersive and kind of, I don't know if rebellious is the right word, but it's an interesting way to tell a story by forcing the player to become a part of the story. I'm a huge fan of Sam Lake and Hideo Kojima, and I think the two of them, and I mean, there's a bunch of other devs too that are absolutely incredible with how they tell their stories, but just in the limelight currently, I think Sam Lake and Kojima are really getting the attention of people who are not necessarily in games. And a lot of people are suddenly learning how you can use different mediums to tell stories, which is, it's interesting to see because I think a story can really be told in any medium. It's whatever medium suits the story best, and that can be film sometimes. Interestingly enough, I saw Mickey 17 recently in theaters, and I absolutely love it. I think it's wonderful, but I left the theater thinking that this should have been a game. And it obviously would have been impossible, and it would have been, 20 more years of development and way more resources and everything. But it was a story where I was so invested in the details, and I wanted to learn so much about all of the side characters, and I just wanted to spend so much more time with the character Mickey, and, he comes back to life every time he dies. And so I was like, okay, he's Mickey 17. I want to see every iteration of that. I want to go through like little side quests and all of this. And it was something that more recently, as I'm kind of learning about games from the dev side, there are so many stories that could maybe be better suited to be played versus just passively watched.
Every medium can be there to tell a story. I think that's a really beautiful thought. Just has to resonate with the people who look at the medium. You have taken your experience from the film industry and also put it into your game.
My day job in the film industry, I did a lot of editing and post-production and color grading. And so I think when people do play the game, they are really absolutely in love with all of the videos. And I think having all of that experience in the film industry, I could just bring that in and make these cool little videos with stock footage, and people were really impressed and they felt really immersed with how the videos were sort of adding a lot to the story, even though it was more of like a like an informational kind of like weird tech company dystopia thing. They're like, oh, this is great. I understand it perfectly. Like I'm in the vibe instantly, which I was very happy that worked.
Yes, it absolutely did. So, since we're already talking about you as a developer, you already told me that you started with Qualia last year and you had a fixed date. You wanted to be done in March this year. In the short time that you've been in game development, is there already a moment in your journey as a game developer that you will always remember?
I guess, yeah, when I there's a couple. I think there's different ways to like qualify or I guess quantify your success. It's interesting because when I released Qualia, a bunch of people played it and I was really excited, and then Queso played it on like the second day it came out, and I lost my proverbial shit, and I was like, oh my god, how did he find this game? He's playing it, he really likes it, he called it game of the year when he was playing it, and I'm just like, okay, this is incredible. Never could have imagined this is insane. And so that then really helped with like rippling out and getting a lot of other people to want to play it and stream it as well. And so that was something that I think is gonna like sit with me for a while. But then, equally as much, when I made this game, I did a lot of like I'm a solo developer, and so I put as much together as I could, and then I sent it over to a friend who was a game dev who was kind of telling me about his experience making games in the past. And when I sent it to him, I kind of asked him like, okay, play this. This is the prototype. Is this worth making into a game? And he played it and he was like, yeah, obviously this is worth making into a game. Also, that's a stupid question. But yes, like, you should make this. And I thought, okay, cool. So I worked on it a little bit. And when I had sent it to him the first time, it was just that, traditional Twine, black background, white text. But interestingly enough, a lot of the format was the same as it is now. It just wasn't pretty when I sent it. So then he thought, okay, good, make it a game. I went back. I actually didn't change too much of the like content of the game, but when I sent it back to him again, I had added in all of that decor, right? The border, the, you know, flickering screen, everything. And I sent it back and he was like, this is the same game? Like, he was shocked that it was still the same game made out of Twine, and I had just added CSS to make it look pretty. And his reaction, I thought was incredible, because you work in a little bit of a silo as a solo dev, and I'm a big eater of validation, where I need validation a lot to be able to like know that I'm going the right direction, because I think I'm far too unbiased, but not even the sense that I like something. It's more of I feel like I can't trust myself as knowing sometimes if I'm doing the right thing. And I'm like, okay, is this the right thing? And people are like, yeah, it's amazing. And I'm like, great, okay, I'll keep doing it. I can't help it. But when I was able to show him like, okay, great, this is what the game would look like if it was pretty, and he just really was shocked that it was even the same engine, I kind of knew that I was very much in the right direction. And even still, people will tell me like, this is Twine? You made this in Twine? Which is sort of my favorite thing, because I want to be able to kind of convince people to play an interactive fiction game and kind of lure them into playing a text game, because I know it's not something that a lot of people play all the time when there's games like Fortnite out there. And so being able to kind of lure people in, and one of my favorite phrases, which is like boil the frog, where you kind of get them in a situation where you've convinced them to try something, and then by the time they spend enough time doing it, they're already completely hooked without realizing what you've actually gotten them to do. The fact that I was able to do that with the game is something that it may convince me next time that I actually do have enough instinct and enough good judgment that I am doing something the right way.
What is the best part of developing your own game?
Oof. The best and worst thing are kind of the same, which is like, I'm working under my own deadline, which is fantastic, because it means that, you know, if I need to move it, I can. But then it also means, because it's my own deadline, I'm not going to move it, because I want it to be this and it's going to be that. It was something where I just wanted it to be March 13th was when my game came out, and it was a deadline that I set. No one else told me to do that. And for about like the month and a half leading up to the game, I just was working so hard, and I just like didn't really get any sleep, and it was all self-imposed. And so it was great, because it was like fantastic. I can do this myself. You know, I don't need, you know, another person that I need to be completely dependent on. I can just work on it myself. I know how long it's going to take me to do it, and I will just do it on my time. And then the worst part about that is it was like, cool, well, I can just keep working on this 24/7. Like, there's no reason to take a break, because why not? I'll just work on it. Which is something I really need to not do next time. But
Yeah, but that's typical. If it's your baby, the thing you are working on, then of course you tend to put in more work than if you're doing the work for someone else.
yeah, exactly. Which, you know, good and bad, but
You can't have the sweet without the sour.
yeah, that's very true.
If you could send a message back in time when you started developing Qualia, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Maybe just like that I should, keep making it. Also, maybe don't worry too much about the programming or like the limitations of the code that I was doing, because when I first started out working in Twine, and there's a story format, Harlow specifically, that I was using, it's very limiting. Twine has a bunch of different story formats, and I would have just so happened to pick the one that is most user-friendly, but also most limiting. And so there's so many things that I wanted to do that Harlow just doesn't let you do. And it was something that I was very concerned about early on, because I had this, I started making it and I thought, great, Harlow is easy to use, so I'm going to be in a good place where, since I don't know a lot of programming, I can kind of make this and it won't be as intimidating. And then just enough work had gone into it where I was like, okay, maybe I'm getting a little annoyed with all the things that Harlow doesn't let me do, but it's at this point way too late to change to a different story format. So I was really stuck with that. And so I would either go back in time and tell myself, okay, don't use Harlow, use a different story format, and then you can do all these other things. Or I would say, all right, it's fine, stick with Harlow and just don't worry about the things that you can't do. Because early on, and it's like so simple and it really doesn't make that big of a difference, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so you mentioned you have the participants' answers, and they appear at different times. That's like a time delay. So they come up at different times, which is, you know, an immersion of like, okay, this is like an entity on the other end of a computer typing something out. And I knew that the time delays would be different for each participant, but I also, in the original dream, I wanted you to be able to see them type out their answer. So it was sort of like a typewriter effect where you would actually see each letter appear as they're typing it out. And unfortunately, you just cannot combine that with the time delay. And so it was something that for a long time, I was really like hyper focused on fixing or figuring out in some way to have both of those things happen. And there just isn't a way to do it. And when it didn't work out, I was really frustrated, and I figured, okay, well, the game is ruined. I can't do this one tiny little thing that I wanted to do, and no one's going to understand it now, and it's over. Might as well stop working on it. And realistically, it doesn't make a difference. Like, it really doesn't even matter. The delay, I think, adds a lot, and people do comment on that, and I really like it. But even more, like, microscope detail of them being able to actually type their answers out, it genuinely doesn't matter. But it was something where I figured, you know, oh, this is going to make or break everything. When, yeah, no, not at all.
So the qualia in that moment.
Exactly. My qualia specifically was very frustrated. Everyone else is like, what? I didn't even know that was something.
Why? You published Qualia under your studio's name CMY2K. How did you come up with the name of your studio?
Ironically, that was a name that I came up with when I was in college. I didn't know that it would be assigned to anything. I just, in college, I loved coming up with like fake company names and then just like getting social media accounts with them and thinking, all right, well, maybe I'll use that for something in the future. And then when I knew that I was going to come out with a game, I figured, okay, well, actually, this is a really cool name that I can bring back, and it really fits the vibe of what I'm trying to do. So it's CMYK, which is it's the colors that you see when you print something. So like RGB on, you know, TVs and computers, and then CMYK is the actual ink. In college, I did a lot of silkscreen, and so I love doing like the halftone pattern where you have like, okay, one shade is all yellow, one is all cyan, one is all magenta, one is all black. And then when you overlay them all on top of each other, you get what appears to be a full color image, but it's just a combination of all of those colors mixed together. And then the Y2K is sort of the very fun fear that everyone had in 1999 when they thought when we would hit 2000 that all the computers would break because the internal clocks wouldn't be able to understand the rollover. And people thought that, you know, robots would kill us all and we would lose technology and all that super fun stuff. And so I figured, you know, it's sort of an abstract explanation, but the combination of, you know, CMYK, which is a very pop, very tangible, you know, physical thing, and Y2K, which is sort of a horror adjacent technology based fear. Both of those things together was sort of the vibe that I wanted to evoke with the games that I make, where, you know, they're not exactly, you know, Silent Hill level creepy or bubblegum pop girl stuff, but it's sort of a combination of like, okay, you have this super bright, vibrant, tangible thing, and then this sort of technology focused fear. Together you have CMY2K.
Cool story.
Yeah, it's funny because someone on Instagram has had CMY2K for years before I came up with the name myself, and then very recently I found out it's actually the sister of a friend that I have. And
really? Whoa.
the whole time someone else has been using that name on Instagram, I've actually known who it was, which is very fun.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
Or is it? Do you get any support? Do you have any kind of independent funding? Do you have a publisher inside, or do you get support from the community? Or do you just burn through your earnings that you have made in your previous job?
Yeah, the last one. I have nothing currently. You know, I set up like a little Patreon and I have a coffee, but I got laid off in January, and I kind of decided that I could, you know, spend time looking for another job, or I could just completely focus on making this game and finishing it and then kind of see what happened. And I did that instead. So I'm currently skating around on potentially very thin ice. But yeah, all of this was self-funded, but also for Qualia itself, because everything, like the stock footage and stock videos and sound effects, everything was free. I really didn't spend a lot of money itself. The only things that I ended up paying for were the soundtrack. So the ending song, Think Happy, that was Justin Oval, and I commissioned him to make that song for this game specifically. So I paid him for that. And then I've some little merch things recently where I got like pins and stickers, and I paid for those. But really, aside from that, I have not put a lot of like money myself into the game because thankfully I didn't need to. I was able to work around having a $0 budget. But yeah, hopefully in the future I can make a paid game or start working on other games that will pay me, which, that's the dream. That's what everyone's trying to do.
You do have a Patreon and a Ko-fi page.
I do, yes.
So when you downloaded Qualia and played through all of the 6 endings, feel free to support Sydney as best as you can. It's definitely worth it. Are you active in the indie game development scene in your area?
I'm in New York, and it's interesting because there's a pretty big, indie film scene here, and I just didn't really know that there was an indie game scene here at all. And it was actually a friend of mine before I got, started in game dev, who told me about there's a couple different sort of indie game circles. There's a group called Gumbo, which is in the Dumbo neighborhood in Brooklyn. It's a group of game devs who are all working professionally, either on their own games or with other games. I'm in that group. There's also a couple other really wonderful groups. There's Arcade Commons, which is a nonprofit for building arcade cabinets. There's also Boshi's Place, which is more of like an artsy version of indie game dev, more like physical exhibitions or things that sort of stretch your understanding of like what a game can be. And I mean, there's so many more than that too. There's just a ton of like little game circles here in the city, which I had no idea about until I kind of started meeting them all. And it's great. They go to all the different conferences. They always have booths together. A big one is MagFest, if anyone is in America and ends up going to that one in Maryland. There's like a ton of corners with like the indie arcade and all of this wonderful stuff. But yeah, there's a wonderful network of game devs here that I really have kind of stumbled into. And they're all so helpful and kind, and it's been great just having people to kind of ask questions about and bring things to playtest nights and see what other people are working on. I definitely recommend like finding a group of people in your area to, kind of physically talk and work on game dev stuff and, maybe do game jams together. But if you don't have something in your area, like even just having like a little online network, it's really wonderful having like a group of people doing something similar to be able to talk things through and see how everyone else is kind of handling it.
Which also perfectly answers the next question I would have, which is what advice would you give to fellow indie devs?
Oh yeah, well that.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll just loop this one in again.
Right.
What is your vision for your game's future? So now that it's released, what would be your dream scenario?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've thought about back to the very first thing I think I answered with where, am I happy enough with it, or am I going to be, thinking about Qualia and what Qualia could be for the rest of my life? I think, I really love how it is now. It is a wonderful kind of time capsule into me becoming a game dev for the first time and learning about that and, putting a bunch of my own personal feelings into a game for people to kind of explore and play. But I also think there is a world where if I were to do something else with Qualia, it could be really nice in, 10, 50, 100 years to, remake it outside of Twine and maybe have it in an engine where you could walk around in, right? Like Unity or Unreal or something, where you can kind of have an even more immersive playthrough where, you're not just sitting at the computer and doing this study, but, you do that. And then you also get to walk around and sort of explore Intellica a little bit more and explore your life a little bit more and kind of, turn a 90-minute 6-ending game into, maybe a 4 or 5 hour experience. But that's also something that doesn't need to happen at all. It can stay completely as it is now, and I will be completely fine with it. I think I would only ever do that if the right moment arises, if, the right situation arises, but it is something that I could see happening in some alternative future where, you know, Qualia gets $1 million to be remade by, you know, crazy publisher. But yeah, we'll see.
There's a lot of crazy publishers out there. So.
Yeah. There's a lot of circumstances in film where, you know, people will make a short film and then that sort of IP of that story will get acquired and then turned into a feature film. And, you know, I won't go on a tangent about it because it's something that I'm very passionate about. But a lot of times when that does happen, the feature film is always worse than the short film. And there's a lot of reasons why that may happen, but it's something that I notice a lot where, for whatever reason, the smaller version of the story with less money, less resources, but more passion always ends up being better than the larger version. And I think, not to say that that would happen with Qualia if it got turned into a larger game, but there is something really special about how it exists now. And I would never want to take that away. So if it does ever become another thing, this version of it will always exist because it is in its own way, it is a perfect version of what it is. And I think it's quite nice to be able to kind of look at that. And I guess, yeah, bring it all the way back to the beginning. That does make me happy enough.
Happy enough. That's a great way to tie the bow around our discussion. You made a wonderful game. It was really fun to play. Everyone who is listening to this episode should play it. You have absolutely no excuse not to because the game is free on Steam.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you like it, leave a review because that'll convince other people to play it too.
Sydney, thank you so much for being on our show and talking with me about your game Qualia.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
All the best to you.
Thanks, you too.